Lords of War, Orcs vs. Dwarves, Volume 1. Written by Martin Vaux and read by Tom Barratt. Part 7. The Hungry Blades. When the raiding party returned, night had all but fallen. In the meantime, Gonky Longtooth and his cohort had felled trees, shaped them, and bound the great boughs together with rope and the skins of freshly slaughtered deer. The results, dragged to the edge of the tree line, were crude war machines, catapults which lacked accuracy or rigidity, but which would last for short periods of fighting. In Gonky Longtooth's mind, that was all they would need them for. The slaughtered carcasses, which were hung about the crude clearing the Orc party had created, would form the basis of a great feast. Flaming torches had been driven into the earth in a large circle, a circle at the outside of which the great rabble of Orcs and Goblins were now waiting. In the centre of the clearing sat Gonky Longtooth. He had taken from within his armour a small whetstone onto which he had spat, and then proceeded to sharpen his two ancient swords. The Orcs and Goblins fell silent as they watched him, the fierce steel glinting and ringing as the general slid them across the whetstone. One side, then the other. He repeated the action on each sword again and again, seeming oblivious to the bloodthirsty army surrounding him. He recalled when the blades and armour had come into his possession. A shipwreck had brought them, from a mighty vessel that he and a warband had lured onto the rocks tens of years ago. In the belly of the ship had been humans, scores of them, pirates, Gonky had wagered, carrying spices and gold and firewater. When the ship had crashed and lain on its side, half drowning in the angry waves, Gonky had led a force on board and found weapons, cleavers and cutlasses, spears and maces, and in the captain's quarters, the swords and armour he now wore. The pirates had been unprepared for the invasion, and he and his warband had slain them all, looting everything of use they could find. In doing so, the gold had gone down into the depths, because Orcs had no use for gold. Since then, Gonky had carried the blades sharper and lighter than anything he had ever seen into every battle and every fight, worn them at every meal or every night while he slept, and never, in all that time, had he lost a fight. Amidst the crowd now watching Gonky, the mighty Orc commander, Cragdish Blackmore, stood silent. A great hunger was blossoming in his belly, and the smell of blood and raw hanging meat was causing a dizziness to rise inside him. Compared to many Orcs, Cragdish knew he was stronger, more disciplined, more thoughtful. As he stood watching the general, however, he felt his self-control begin to slacken, and noted that if he was beginning to lose power over his own desires, then it wouldn't be long until the rest of the rabble descended into a riot for blood, war, and meat. It was then that Gonky Longtooth stood up and began staring out into his army with his one good eye. "Welcome, boys," he said with that dry, deep voice, "to the night before the day of battle." The Orcs whooped and hollered, the Goblins by their side hissing and screaming, but the old Orc raised a hand and the troop fell silent again. "Tomorrow many of you will die. Many more of you will kill and feast. Whatever the outcome of our war, one thing will be certain. I will be your leader." There was a smattering of grunts and the clashing of weapons in the crowd, but clearly there was some doubt amongst the party. "Now there may be some amongst our band of murderers who doubt me, I know that. Gonky Longtooth be old, they says. Gonky Longtooth don't got it in him." All now were silent. The sound of the deep forest was suddenly audible, just at the edge of hearing. "Now," continued the general, "there ain't many here who can lead. Ain't many who would have the guts, the smarts, the cunning that I do to do it. I look around at you all and I see fighters and killers, not leaders. You can't plan, you can't think, you just do, and that's what I need from you. You good little murderers, that's what Gonky likes." The silence hung in the air like mist, trying not to settle. Gonky spun on his heels and bared his teeth suddenly, looking out into the party with a fierce glare that none of them had ever witnessed. "I ain't like you," said Gonky. "I ain't weak like you, I ain't scared like you. I'm a killer of the highest order. I've seen more wars than any of you could count, and I've planned, my boys, for reinforcements to arrive tomorrow. Reinforcements that not a soul amongst you knew was coming." Growls and murmurs rose in the party, unsure as to what to think about the news. "From the deepest, darkest places in the burning mountains, spider riders be coming." Several roars sounded out in the night. "From the flaming scrublands, with teeth like knives, war hogs be coming." More roars, fierce sounds like wrathful thunder echoed through the trees of the forest. "And more like you is coming," said Gonky, pointing his fingers out towards the group, his filthy talon-like nails indicating every one of them in turn. "You ain't special orcs, most of you. You goblins, you ain't special at all. If you die, no other orc's gonna miss you. Ain't nobody gonna think about you no more, not unless you fight better, be stronger, kill more, and show Orcus that you're strong like him." Now the force of the roars seemed enough to knock Gonky off his feet, but he stood firm, stroking his long white beard and smiling a deep, fearless smile. From within the crowd, Cragdish Blackmore felt his head spin. He was losing his handle on himself. Around him he could see scores of orcs and goblins were already lost, no longer individuals but instead a mindless rabble, hungry only for killing. "And yet," shouted Gonky Longtooth. The warband once again fell silent. "There is one amongst you who thinks, in spite of all this, that he would make a better leader than me." No orc amongst the rabble made a sound, but those capable of thinking knew who it was that the old general was referring to. "Step forth, Vanak Flesh Ripper," said Gonky. The terrifying grin spread thick across his face. The Flesh Ripper stepped out from the crowd, pulling loose his cleaver and his axe. "You and me, Flesh Ripper," continued the general. "We got to Kal Uni to settle this once and for all." Vanak Flesh Ripper looked up at the general and realized for the first time how much taller he was, how much thicker his limbs were, and how much sharper the old orc's blade were than his. "We don't need to fight," said Vanak, his voice croaking and quivering with fear. "Don't we?" said Gonky, twirling his sword. "And why is that, you filthy little liar?" "'Cause I ain't as strong as you," continued the Flesh Ripper. "And you's right. I ain't got the smarts. I ain't got nothing on you. Not really." "Is it now?" said Gonky, his deep grin seeming to get deeper by the moment. "So why don't you fight me then to prove you're the better orc?" Vanak Flesh Ripper shook his head, dropping his weapons by his side. "Very well," continued Gonky Longtooth. "Then kneel." The Flesh Ripper looked up at the old general in disbelief. Orcs and goblins watched on, the fever in the crowd rising, drool sliding through teeth and over lips. "You don't want to fight me? Then you kneel to me," screamed Gonky. The Flesh Ripper obeyed. Gonky walked over to the young commander and placed a sword tip under the chin of his bested opponent. "Tomorrow you better die for me," said the old general quietly. "But tonight we feast." As the orcs and goblins erupted with joy, an ecstasy of brutal fumbling, Gonky Longtooth remained staring into the eyes of Vanak Flesh Ripper. All about them meat was being wrenched from bones, weapons swung, and screams of joy were sounding. But between the two of them, a moment of deep hatred lingered. It wasn't over between them, and they both knew it.